Well, hello and welcome back. I'm Guy Stevens with the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, and you are here with us for our In the News segment. I'm going to do something a little bit different today. For our In the News story today, I want to cover actually one of our own news stories that we publish on the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint's website, which is endseclusion.org. Certainly encourage you to check out and follow our website. This is a story that we published just here recently. And let me share with you a little bit about the story. I'm going to talk about kind of some of the really main details that we covered in this story. And the story was called A Last Resort. It was published actually on August 9th. And that phrase, a last resort, may be something you've heard before when it comes to the use of restraint seclusion. We often hear that restraint seclusion are used as a last resort when a child's behavior has somehow put themselves or others in harm. The truth of the matter is, though, if we look at the data, if we look at the instances of this happening, what we often find is restraint and seclusion is not being used in a truly life-threatening situation as a last resort, but it's often used for noncompliance, for disrespect, for minor behavior, for property damage, a host of other things. And of course, the problem with that is that restraint and seclusion are traumatizing. They can lead to significant injuries. They can lead to death. So, when we talk about last resort, and of course, there was guidance that came out from the federal government in 2012 in a restraint and seclusion resource document that talked about the conditions when restraint and seclusion might be appropriate. And the conditions really were that it was a situation that involved an imminent threat of serious physical harm to the student or somewhere else and used as a last resort. The important thing there to note is that use of imminent serious physical harm. We hit this in the article as well, but when we talk about imminent serious physical harm, what we're really talking about here is the criteria by which the Department of Education said restraint and seclusion might be considered in their 2012 guidance. And imminent serious physical harm has a legal definition. It's the same as it's defined in IDEA. It is a substantial risk of death, extreme physical pain, protracted and obvious disfigurement, or protracted loss or impairment of the function of a bodily member, organ, or mental faculty. This is a really high bar, but what we often see is that kids are restrained for far lesser things happening. They're not necessarily life-threatening situations. And here we're going to share in this story a actual report related to a young girl who was being physically restrained in a classroom, actually in North Carolina, as I recall. And, I'm going to share with you a little bit about what that report says. But again, keep in mind here that, what federal guidance says is you should not do these things unless it is a potentially life-threatening situation. Of course, we have no federal law. We need federal law. We need federal lawmakers to take action. But in the meantime, every state has their own law or lack thereof related to restraint and seclusion. And of course, these are civil rights issues, human rights issues, disability rights issues. And we need to make sure that we're protecting our most vulnerable. So anyway, let me dive into the report here that we're going to jump into. And what I'm going to bring up here on the screen is I'm actually going to share pieces of an actual report that was a restraint and seclusion report. And on this report, which is handwritten, you see it talks about where it happens. It says, okay, the location was on a playground. Then it went to a classroom, and then it went to a quiet room. And of course, a quiet room we know is a seclusion room. The incident started at 10:50, and it lasted until 11:45. So for nearly an hour, there was a restraint and seclusion event happening to this child. And again, this child was a 5-year-old kindergarten student, not in school for more than a month when this occurred. There are a couple of things that are left blank here in terms of what staff was involved with the restraint and were they trained and what were they trained in, and that's left blank. It says, were these authorized techniques used? Not sure exactly what that means. And let's look a little deeper. So what happened here? What happened that led to this 5-year-old child with a disability being physically restrained and secluded for up to almost an hour? So if we look at the incident, here's what it says. Student was asked to go down the slide the correct way. So a kid was restrained and secluded for nearly an hour because they did not go down the slide the correct way. Now, again, think about the guidance here. Imminent serious physical harm. Very doubtfully was that situation one that involved imminent serious physical harm. It said she slid down the slide and came over to the behavior specialist to hit and spit at her, and then transitioned to the classroom with assistance, where it continued to hit, kick, spit, and urinate on the floor. Okay, so think about this for a second. Kid comes down the slide after being told not to do it, and probably being gave demands to be compliant, and then apparently was very upset and very frustrated and kicked and spit, and then says the child was transitioned to the classroom with assistance. What does that mean? That means restraint. If you're moving someone against their will, you are physically restraining them. It is not different. You can call it a transport, but if you're putting hands on them and preventing them from moving on their own, that is absolutely a physical restraint. Then, of course, the child continued to hit and kick. Well, at that point, your hands are on the child, that you're threatening the child. Whether you think you're threatening or not, when you put hands on someone, I don't care if it's a child or an adult, they are pre-programmed. They are biologically programmed to defend themselves. Survival is a biological imperative. So when people are fearful, and that's exactly what happened to this little girl. When people are fearful, they will swing their arms, they will kick, they will spit, they will try to get free. That is a human response. That is not a response that is abnormal for somebody that's experiencing this. And mention that little girl urinate on the floor. How terrified was this child to actually urinate on the floor? Of course, people often look at this and think, oh, well, they made a choice. They were just, this is not about choice. This is a biological reaction to extreme stress. This is a stress response from a child that does not feel safe. So the report goes on to talk about what interventions were tried before the restraint. It says here, choices to walk on her own or with help. Think about that for a second. Either we're going to restrain you or you're going to walk on your own. Now, if you're already dysregulated, that is not going to help you to regulate it. What we needed here was an adult to help co-regulate a child who was very dysregulated, not one to make demands or give choices that really are no choice at all. And then it said choice of clothing to change into after urinating on her clothing. Okay, well, we had to provide clean clothes to a child, of course. But then it says that while what behavior would necessitate the restraint: kicking, hitting, spitting, scratching staff, throwing water bottle. Again, think about the criteria: imminent serious physical harm. A 5-year-old throwing a water bottle, is this a life-threatening situation? I'll just leave that question. I don't think it even needs an answer. If we go down on the report, we say, what injuries, if any, occurred as a result of the restraint? No injuries were seen. The point I want to make here is that trauma is not something that you see, but it is very much an injury, and it's an injury that actually can become a physical injury, changing your brain and actually causing changes to happen in your brain. We're not talking about we're not speaking figuratively here. Actual changes can occur in your brain due to trauma, and this is something that is extremely traumatic. So because you cannot see an injury does not mean that you've not done harm or injured someone. Then, of course, it says, what did the child do while they were being restrained? Yelling, crying with tears, glad they specified, spitting, attempting to scratch the adult. This is horrific. Think about this for a second. We're actually just paying attention to what this child is doing while they're being restrained. While they're being restrained, they are being human. They are trying to save themselves. Their threat detection system has been triggered. They are in a fight or flight response. This is a terrified child crying real tears. So it says that did the behavior change after the event? It says no, continue yelling, crying, spitting. But I guess at some point they decided to let the child free. So at some point those behaviors were deemed not life-threatening, but when they decided to restrain the child, they were. Also talks about how the grandmother picked up the child, then spoke to her about following directions. So this poor child, who still had stress hormones pulsing through her body, who still was probably feeling very dysregulated, then probably, under the advice of the teachers, was told, they've got to know what they did wrong. They need to follow directions. We don't physically restrain or seclude someone because they did not follow directions. This is a failure. So at any rate, wanted to share this report with you because I know many of you have instances much like this, and we really have to point out what's happening here, what shouldn't be happening, because we can absolutely do better. Restraint and seclusion, well, you know what I think about this. We should never seclude a child. Putting a child in a room or area against their will and not letting them leave is never something that should be done. And restraint should be exceedingly rare. If it's truly a life-threatening situation, Child's going to jump in front of a moving car. Child has a weapon. Absolutely, we need to take action and we need to save a life. But the majority of these instances, as this example shows, are not life-threatening situations. So anyway, just wanted to share that in our In the News segment today. And of course, we are going to continue with these segments, continue to ask you to join us and join us for these sessions. And we will see you again real soon. So thank you.